were there. And the main thing I will share kicking off, because this workshop is usually done in about a 3-hour block altogether. We divided it up, which good news is, that makes this part shorter. But we divided it up where we did the first section of some key foundational things in the Sunday school hour. And I'll very, very quickly review that. And then, to give you a heads up, those you guys who were there, I just want to maybe get a little bit of just kind of what's going on in your head following that. And we'll check in at least a couple times on that. I don't want to just talk and talk and talk, which we won't do that anyway, but I don't want to just talk and talk and miss what's going on in your own thought processes. So we'll check in on that. We'll have some time for Q&A. We'll do all that stuff. But first, this morning we shared two key foundational metaphors that we really lean into. We think about engaging in healthy conversational evangelism with other people. And one was the imagery that we find in the Gospels of the parable of the sower, or the four soils, right? And, if you remember that story, the farmer, he's throwing out seed like crazy and just generous, just all over the place, almost wasteful, right? Just everywhere, and it lands in all these different places. He's not predetermining what the good soil is. He's just chunking it out there, and it lands in all kinds of soil. There was two key principles that we want to pull out of that. One principle is we do have to scatter lots of seeds. If you are under the impression that the only seed scatterer in a church is the preacher, you're under the wrong impression. Okay? A single human being has limited capacity, and you want to be scattering lots and lots of seeds. Also, we're going to talk about this afternoon some conversational practices that helps you essentially season your conversations to, in a sense, scatter lots of seed in your everyday interactions. The second key principle we pulled out of that parable was we need to shift our mindset from, I gotta win the argument, to, I'm looking for receptivity to the conversation. I'm not even saying receptivity to conversion right away. If it happens right away, wonderful. Sometimes people are ready. But receptivity to engage the conversation. Because oftentimes it will be many conversations, right? And sometimes we tend to be more interested in winning the argument than winning the person. And we just got to get away from that mentality. We need to get away from that posture. It's not, even if that was the way to do things at some point in our history, it's not going to connect with secular people today. Okay? We need to have a sense of, one, kind of getting beyond people as a project and connect with people as people. All right? And we're not trying to win the argument. Now, again, the exception in terms of the conversation being, if you're talking with a good friend and what you know about them is debate, is just how they talk, because we all have those friends. Some of you are in here. Some of you are those people. But debate is just how they talk. Well, fine. That's how the conversation's taking place. But you need to know them well enough to know that. What we're really talking about is a posture of just, I'm going to argue everyone into the kingdom somehow. Okay? That's not really how it's going to work for most people. And there may have been, one of the things I've kind of said to groups sometimes is, listen, there are probably times in our history, if you look back, even just American history, there's times in our history where there's approaches that really were effective and did usher people into the kingdom that aren't going to be as effective today because the culture's changed. It's like Michael said during the sermon this morning, the how needs to meet the culture where it's at. And so we have to do that these days. And while I would say the gospel has always pointed us in a direction of caring about relationship and caring about the human person, that's going to be even more true today in terms of the effectiveness of the message. We also have to remember this. When we read the Gospels, we see community and relationship and compassion and kindness, all those fruits of the Spirit, and all that good stuff, right? Serving each other, washing feet, all that stuff. And then when you see the Pharisees and all that, right? What we have to remember is what we win somebody with is what we win them to. The way people come to Jesus, the manner they come to Jesus is what they're going to also become and what they will emulate. And so when someone comes to Jesus, through us lovingly, kindly walking with them and having dialogue with them, meeting them where they're at and moving at their pace to discover faith in Christ, that's how they will do it with somebody else. Okay? What we win people with is what we win them to. Another metaphor that we really draw on as foundational is the concept of the mosaic. And if you remember your art history, a mosaic is a big piece of art where you're putting down pieces of colored glass or tile, and as you put that down, the more and more you lay down, the clearer and clearer the picture becomes. And we use that metaphor to say every conversation you have with somebody, and we are assuming it's going to be multiple conversations most of the time, an ongoing evangelistic friendship that is forming. As you have conversations with somebody, each time you're laying down a few more tiles. And the question comes up, where do I start? In other words, what's the first story I need to tell, the first thing I need to share? And my response is, I don't care. Because it's whatever spiritual conversation they're ready to have. If it's the central message of death, resurrection, salvation, if that's what they're ready to hear, wonderful. If that's what they're ready for, great. But just have whatever spiritual conversation they're ready to have. Now, do you hope to get to death, resurrection, salvation? Of course you do. Maybe it happens in the third conversation, maybe the 30th conversation. But you want to meet them where they are, because if we force the conversation they're not ready for, it's not necessarily going to produce disciples whose roots are going down deep. Okay? When we force it. So we're meeting people where they are. Now again, don't misunderstand. If they're ready to have that conversation, have that conversation, for goodness sakes, okay? If that's the one they're ready for. But the key principle for the metaphor of the mosaic is start where people are, not where we want them to be. And how often have our scripted presentations started where we want people to be, or we just assume everyone is? It's a one-size-fits-all. One exercise I sometimes do with groups, it's not really usually in this workshop, so just briefly, is I'll lay out some different profiles for them. Seeker, open to the message, open to the messenger, never heard the story, hostile to Christianity, distorted version, and kind of just lay that out and say, how would you approach each one? The point being, it's not a one-size-fits-all. For example, do you approach the person as hostile? Do you talk to the person as hostile the way you would someone who's a seeker? The seeker is a person who's actively looking. Like they may just show up at your door. Like they're looking. The open to the message is someone who, if you go to them, they'll listen. But they probably won't just show up at your door. All right? People that's open to the messenger, they like you. They like hanging out with you. They're not even sure why. But then again, there's the person that's hostile. They'll maybe really push back. Maybe even be aggressive. Or do you really begin the conversation, the relationship with each one the same way? No. It's not a one-size-fits-all. We start where people are, not where we want them to be. Okay? So let me hit pause, and we're going to pivot a little bit, but first I want to check in with you, right? Because I went through that stuff. We kind of started out a little bit some dialogue in the Sunday school time. And then I'm looking at the clock and I'm going, I got to get the parable in, I got to get the mosaic in. and so I want to stop and check in with you. What's been going through your mind? Especially, you can respond to what you just heard and that's fine. But it's certainly you guys that have had an hour or so to think about it, since this morning. What's been going through your mind? What are some things that are coming into your head? What are you thinking? What are you feeling? What are you hearing? Yeah. That's a great question. Where do you know where they are to start with? Two things. One, we're going to talk about some conversational practices that might trigger some conversation, all right, because we do want to take initiative, but also listening. The most important evangelistic skill is actually not talking. It's listening. Do we want to verbalize our faith? Yes, we do. Part of the problem we have today is we've moved into this mode of like a passive, nonverbal, we kind of created this thing where And I remember sitting through trainings on this, like from some of the movements in the 90s that were taking place, where it's just live this really good life and someone will ask you someday. And here's the thing. They usually didn't ask, so we didn't tell. And I got to tell you, here's the thing. I sat through trainings. I helped pass some of this stuff on to other people. So it was a corrective that was trying to give back to relationship. I think the proponents of this approach meant well, because we're trying not to be pushy. We're trying not to be kind of a jerk about it. But what we end up doing is creating passivity. We didn't ask, they didn't ask, we didn't tell, and it was kind of rooted in a little bit of arrogance. They're going to ask us someday because we're awesome and they're not. I mean, that is the kind of the mindset. They're going to ask someday because we are so good and they're just not, and so they're going to ask us how we're so amazing. And it kind of, we have a few stories where, it does work sometimes. That did work sometimes, of course. But most of the time, they didn't ask. They didn't ask. And so we do need to verbalize. But I think part of it, though, is listening. Is we're getting in relationships, and maybe we are able to do some things that trigger some conversation. Maybe they ignore those things, and we'll talk more about this. But maybe they'll ignore those things, but we're still talking. We're still engaging, and we're listening for their story. We're listening for where they're at. And what it is even when you trigger a spiritual conversation and you start being in that conversation, it's not just our agenda where it's like, let me tell you, it's like, oh great, they're ready to talk. Let me tell you this, this, and this. No, we're listening, we're talking. We're listening, we're asking questions, and what do you think of this? And what was your experience? And maybe it's close, maybe it's way out there, but we're listening. We're listening. And that's the thing, is I think the most important evangelistic skill is actually listening to their story, listening to their journey. One of the things when I've done evangelistic Bible studies where it was like, someone like a short-term mission trip meets them, really don't even know the person that well, it's kind of cold call type situation. One of the first things I would always do is say, tell me your spiritual story. And again, sometimes they're pretty close, sometimes they're way out there. But just tell me your story, and I'll give you one more point of this just because it's so much fun. There is a guy I know in the Denver area, I knew a while back, and he tried this experiment where he went outside a coffee shop. You know what? He didn't buy a single cup of coffee. You know what he did later? A few weeks later, he tried a different experiment. Same thing, piece of cardboard. Goes there, writes on it, I'll buy you a cup of coffee if you tell me your story about God. He had 14 conversations and only one took him up in the cup of coffee. People want to share their own life. If we can learn to listen, be a little patient, and understand their story. So, what else? Sorry, I've spent a long time on that. What else? What's going rattling around in your head, thinking about this morning, and yeah. Sure.
My response was, he believes in you.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, I thought that they did believe in God, but not believe in Him.
Yeah.
But that gets you nowhere.
Yeah. So the question is, what about someone who says, I don't believe in God? And again, everyone's at a different starting point, right? Which kind of gets back to the point that it's not a one-size-fits-all. Someone who believes in God versus someone who says they doesn't believe in God is a different starting point on the conversation. Everyone's different, so I think every conversation really will look different. But I would start asking questions like, tell me what you do believe in. And 9 out of 10 times, there will be some kind of spirituality. There are some true, what I would call like orthodox atheists out there that are really true materialists. Those people exist. The reality is, our culture right now, while church, here's the irony, guys. Church is on decline overall. Spirituality there's a lot of indicators it's on the rise. Interest in spirituality. So there's something we're missing, okay? And I don't know what all that is, but there's something we're missing. And so I would ask them what they do believe, and just kind of hear their thoughts. They may be. I've worked with several people that went from atheism to Buddhism before stopping at Christianity because for not necessarily folk Buddhism, that a lot of people in Southeast Asia would be more folk Buddhism. There's all kinds of gods and things, but really the kind of Buddhism that like hipsters embrace will be kind of non-theistic, so there's no God. There's just kind of a general spirituality. And so that's a very natural stop on the way from atheism. Now, maybe some people stay there, but then for some people, that's just a sign that they're on a journey to somewhere else because they decided they wanted a spirituality. There's a story that there's a New Testament scholar out of the UK that I've read a bunch, and I saw an interview with him where he was telling a story where he was a chaplain at one of the universities in England. And so, and he's Anglican, so he'd wear the collar, the whole thing, So like they saw him on campus from across campus. They know what he is, And so it's not just like a tie, He's got the thing. So students would come up to him all the time, and they would just come right up to him because this is England, and they say, which if you don't know, it's very secular, And they come up and say, "I don't believe in God." And like just come up to him, "I don't believe in God." They volunteer it. So his response would be, "Well, tell me about the God you don't believe in." And most of the time, the thing they described, he goes, "Yeah, I don't believe in that God either." So, and that's the thing, like they've made a choice about God based on, I don't want to say first impression, because it might be second and third and fourth, but based on an impression. Do they really know anything about the story of Jesus? They know really anything about the narrative the Bible tells about God? Do they really know that? Sure. Yeah. 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 I would ask about that story. Listen to their story. What is it that triggered that? Now let's be real. There are people that truly walk away from Jesus and make that choice. I mean, it happened to Jesus. I mean, Paul talks about being abandoned by people. Like, we're probably not immune, right? So that does happen. However, there's also just a lot of people that have walked away from their religious experience, and it wasn't really, that was kind of what they mainly walked away from, and so Jesus, the jury's still out, So again, I would listen to their story. And maybe a place to start is just be that Christian who listens to their story unconditionally. Unconditionally, because they may not want to tell it and afraid of being judged, which might say something about their religious experience. So. If it's a negative experience. There's a lot of negative experiences. I had a group I was doing evangelism class with, and when I was in New York, and I had somebody say to me, he said, well, actually a few people said this. They said, well, we're talking to people, and they all go, oh, well, everyone in the church is hypocrites, which is kind of an overgeneralization, that people use. But they said, everyone in the church is hypocrites. And I go, well, I would just point them back to Jesus and talk about Jesus talks about all the religious hypocrites, and like Jesus just goes after that stuff. And yeah, I couldn't agree more, just leaning in, because again, I just want to lean back into Jesus every time. And then we'll work our way back to church, community, those things. But I want to lean into Jesus, first and foremost every time. We had somebody in one of the groups we started, and it was a group of seekers. She was from a Middle Eastern country. She was secular, not practicing Muslim at all, and very, very secular. And she was telling the story where before she arrived, from times before she arrived in kind of the group that she was in with us, she said, she was talking, and she said, yeah, people used to always ask me, are you a Christian? And finally I said, well, what is that? She had no experience with it. She said, she came from a Middle Eastern country, very secular. There are some countries that are secularizing in the Middle East. And she said, what is a Christian? And I don't know what they said to her, I wasn't in the conversation. One of our other guys was. And I don't know what they said to her, but she goes, oh, no, I'm not one of those. She goes, but I'm really interested in Jesus. You know? So go figure. One or two more thoughts from this morning. Things that are right. What's going on in your head?
Well, I heard someone say, if they say there's nothing but a bunch of hypocrites at church, I say, well, what a better place for them to be then, so they can learn.
Yeah, and even that, just pivoting that back to Jesus, be like, yeah, the more they get exposed to Jesus, what he says about hypocrites, maybe they'll start to listen. You know, absolutely. Yeah. Anybody else? What's rattling around your head? Yeah, I mean, this will actually be really helpful for shy people thing. We're going to go here in just a minute. So just hang on with me, and then hopefully what we do is helpful. So I'm going to put that on hold.
All right.
Anything else? Yeah. I don't? Why not? Okay, we're going to get there too, so we got to move on. Okay, so, all right. She said being afraid to talk to people. Okay, so here's what we're gonna work on in just a few minutes. There's 3 conversational practices that I'm going to share with you guys that we're going to work on this afternoon. This is not everything there is to evangelism. It's not everything that can be said, everything that can be done. Because here's the thing. I'm a real believer that if you overload people with too much information, you walk out of here and do nothing. So we're going to hit just 3 practices, and if you can just do some of this, I mean, try doing it all. I mean, really. But if my thinking is if you'll just try some of this, just walk out and do something, we've moved the needle. Okay. But we're going to do 3 key practices. Again, really built on the foundational metaphors I was talking about earlier. Really built on those ideas, philosophically speaking, built on these approaches. And this is not like the go up to a stranger stuff. I've done that. You can do that. That's fine. The salesman can do that. That's great. But this is some stuff that everybody can do in your regular interactions. For the shy person, from the scared person, this is the thing that everybody can do. And so we'll get a little bit more into it. First thing I want to do is a little bit of an exercise, and there is a method to the madness here. So if you don't understand why I'm doing this with you, you will shortly. But first, just do what I ask. And that is, I want you to turn to your tables. I'm going to give you a few minutes, enough to have some conversation, and I want you to talk about anything. It could be sports, it could be a movie you saw, something on TV last week. It could be, I don't know, man, your kid at school, something at your job. I don't care. Have a conversation about someone pick a topic and get it started. Have a conversation about anything, and I'm going to give you a good few minutes on it, and then I will interrupt and we'll talk about why I'm having you do this. But turn and have a conversation about whatever. At your table. All right. Cool deal. So, you guys talk about different things. What do we talk about at our tables? What are we talking about over here?
We got caught up in movies.
You got talking about movies? Okay, that's where you went. What about over here? What do we talk about? Horses. Okay, start talking about horses.
Sports, guitar playing.
Sports and what? Guitar playing. Okay. And inventories. Okay, what about over here? Family stuff. You guys talk here? Okay. Well, you guys just got started. Children. Okay. Did you guys talk? What did we talk about? Names. Okay. Like, what's your name? Okay. Cool. Did you guys talk over here? Sorry? How unusual a name is. Yeah, that can. Okay, that can be a real conversation topic. Yeah.
We were talking about why they were talking about horses.
You were talking about why they're talking about horses. How did you know they were talking about horses?
I eavesdropped a little bit.
Is that really what you talked about?
I learned new names.
Okay, so just kind of a get to know you a little bit. Oh, right there. Okay, gotcha. What did you guys talk about?
Garden.
Gardening. You did not want to stop.
No.
Okay. Cool. Did anybody change topics during the conversation? Did I give you enough time for that?
Yes.
You guys did a lot. So how did that happen?
I asked him, I didn't really know what he did. I thought he was in inventory, so we were talking about that, and then he started off with the Spurs, and so
Okay.
therefore we're talking about sports, we're talking about inventories, and he was talking about pastimes and word puzzles, and then I said, well, I'll play the guitar, but I need to get back to it because it's
How did those changes in topic happen?
just kind of a silence in the conversation, and then
And somebody else brought up something else?
something else.
Okay. Kind of popped in.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Anybody else? Did topics change at all? I might have needed to give you a few more minutes for that, but did any topics change at all? You guys stayed on course, movies all the time? Did you change which movies you were talking about? Okay, how did that happen?
Well,
We were trying to get caught up.
I was doing most of the talking.
Okay.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
We started with one movie and kind of played that one out, so I brought up another one, and then he jumped in.
Okay. When he jumped in, what did you jump in with?
Seeing other movies,
Okay.
what's coming out.
Okay. Just mentioning something else along those lines. Okay. Yeah. Cool. Did you guys change it all? Or did you stay on gardening the whole time? Okay. If anything, let me ask you this. And usually I let this go for a few more minutes, and then topics really start to change a lot more tables. If something spiritual related, faith related, God related had entered your conversations in a pretty natural way, what could those have been?
But we did kind of.
From gardening to what church you go to? That would have happened?
Or my hearing aid doctor, I just invited him to come to church one day.
Okay. Just out of the blue? All right. Okay. What about?
Brought up a spiritual movie.
Okay. Yeah.
Great Awakening.
Great. Well, of course.
Because not everybody's seen it.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to get everybody to see it.
Yeah.
It's on Netflix.
Yeah. But that's obviously a natural bridge to like
Oh, yeah.
faith conversation because it's out there in the theater. It's a faith movie. Yeah. Okay.
Meet somebody for the first time and they have a biblical name.
Well, that's like names. Yeah. So I mean, that's what.
Sarah.
Yeah, you Sarah. Yeah. So even just mentioning where that comes from, and there's probably, I would say, a really good chance that if it's a more secular person, they don't know the story at all.
They always ask me, is it with an H? And I say, yes, like the Bible.
Yeah. And so, one of the guys in our team has reached out a lot, like in Muslim communities. His name is Gabriel. So, then the angel Gabriel appears in the Quran, and so that's always a very natural bridge as well.
Does anybody know that the name Sarah in the Bible? He wasn't as old as Methuselah, but he was the second oldest.
He's an old dude. He's an old dude. Yeah, I know. What about you guys? Changed topics a few times. If something spiritual, faith-related, God-related had come into the conversation, you guys are all over the place.
I was
What?
going to interrupt them, but I went to go get my sweater.
Okay.
I was going to mention I had a big little group of ladies, all faiths,
Yeah.
and I got nowhere with them.
Yeah.
Catholics would turn their back on me, like literally. Like,
Yeah. Okay.
I don't want to hear what you're saying.
Okay.
And the only thing that all the other ones did not believe, we needed to have music in the Church of Christ.
Yeah.
And they said, oh yeah, we'll convert, but we need.
Yeah.
Y'all are so boring.
Yeah.
We need an orchestra
Yeah.
or somebody, singing.
So would that have? How would that have come up naturally in this conversation?
I guess if we were
With a
talking about
guitar.
music, the guitar.
Okay, tell me about that. Yeah.
But she was missing in action. So.
Okay. So she missed that. Okay, gotcha. Yeah. So maybe even the idea of our arts and praise and all those kind of things. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
in
Gotcha.
my lifetime, I've only brought two to God's kingdom.
Sure.
I lost them.
Yeah.
But I brought them.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
And it's better to have known the gospel and not just,
Sure.
leave it behind.
Sure.
The altar returns to its vomit.
Sure. What else? Anybody else? Things that would have come up that might have been spiritual.
I was thinking the garden people could have said, well, our church had a garden and we had this experience
Yeah.
to our community or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I might have even gone to something like, I mean, man, God created us to care for the planet, and even, I mean, a lot of folks that are outside of the church care about the environment, the planet, and so even just referencing like, man, God called us to take care of this, and just, dropping that in there. Yeah. So this kind of gets to that. There's kind of a reason behind this to kind of help us walk into this a little bit. That it gets into the first of three practices, conversational practices that we want to talk about. And that first thing is just simply making spiritual statements. And here's the thing: it's not anything overly complicated. It is something that anybody can do. We often refer to this as a first practice. It's not the only thing to do, right, in conversations, but it is a first practice that anybody can do. It's essentially, and I'm not trying to stretch the parable out of shape or anything, but it's essentially casting seeds in your conversations, essentially. It's seasoning your conversations. And so it's just making a one-liner, not more than a sentence or two, that organically, naturally fits the conversation. Gardening is great. Movies are great. There's all kinds of topics we can have that we're talking and something spiritual can come into it, just a one-liner. And here's what that does. It does one of two things. Either you make a spiritual statement, you reference God, Jesus, faith, the biblical story in some way, some form or fashion, and that actually turns the conversation where they respond to it. It's something on their mind. And so, again, they're at a place, they're in a season of life where they're open and want to have this conversation. And so it turns the conversation that way, and you're a happy camper because now you're getting to talk about God. Or they will not respond to your spiritual statement, but next time you see them, do it again. We're not talking about hijacking the conversation. You're in a 30-minute conversation, and maybe you do this twice, 5 seconds each, okay? Just for example, right? Just for example. You're not hijacking the whole conversation. You're just making these references to God, faith, Jesus, etc. You're making these spiritual references, and either it will pivot the conversation because they actually want to have that conversation. It triggers something positive for them or something curious for them. Or it goes nowhere, but here's what you also did. The second thing you do is you are signaling to them that you are a person of faith without shoving it down their throat. You're in a regular conversation, and it's just part of who you are. It just seasons the conversation, right? And you just mention these things, and they ignore you, and you keep talking, and they're aware that you are a person of faith. And when you see them again and again, you just, these things come up regularly in conversation, naturally. You make these spiritual statements in conversation, and someday, if they are in a different season of life, you may be one of the people to talk to who is safe to talk to, because they know, oh, that's a person that believes in God, that's a person who follows Jesus, that's a Christian or whatever, and, you're not someone who has been, completely obnoxious with them. All right? Like, you didn't hijack the conversation. You weren't preaching at them the whole time, but you were just salting, seasoning that conversation. I tell people regularly, they talk about, I had a guy, an intern, he was working in a neighborhood. It was a Bangladeshi neighborhood in New York, and he came to me and goes, "This doesn't work." I said, "What do you mean it doesn't work?" I made all kinds of spiritual statements. No one responded. I said, "It's working. You just haven't talked to anyone that's receptive to the conversation this week." It's working just fine. Because here's the thing. If someone ignores you, you're in a conversation, you make a spiritual statement, someone ignores you, let them. They probably heard you. They just don't want to have this conversation right now. You make a spiritual statement and they make a fast change of the subject, they definitely heard you. For sure. So let them. It's okay. Next time you see them, do it again. You're not hijacking the whole conversation. You're not sitting them down for a 45-minute sermon. You didn't even go this long up there, do you? But you're not doing that. You're seasoning your conversations. Remember, this isn't everything, but it's a first practice, right? You're seasoning your conversations. This is something that every believer can do. You just get in the habit of just mentioning matters of faith, and hopefully not churchy statements, really, like everyday normal language. And we're just speaking about God and about matters of faith and spirituality in everyday normal language. And we make these statements in conversation that naturally fits the conversation. And that's what I was saying earlier, like you guys talking about gardening, you'd be like, man, I feel like God just made us to take care of, or I believe, because we read it somewhere, just God made us to take care of the earth, and this just feels like a small sample of that. And you could say that in the middle of a hour-long conversation as you're talking about gardening with somebody, and it just signals I'm a person of faith. And maybe they respond or maybe they don't. Two, if you make a spiritual statement and someone just, man, it triggers them in a negative way and they want to start fighting and start an argument, you change the subject. Now again, the exception is this is a friend and you know them well enough that like that's how they talk. Like debate is just how they go. That's how they roll. That's different. But if it's someone just like launching in, they just want to fight, in our cultural climate that we're in, that's not going to do very much most of the time. They're just looking to pick a fight. They're being triggered by something. And again, maybe another time you have another opportunity for a conversation. It's like, hey, tell me a little bit more about your story. What's been your experience with spiritual? I don't believe it. Okay, tell me about that. And have a little bit more conversation. So spiritual statements. We actually do this all the time. We're just convinced that evangelism is like a salesy kind of presentation we have to make or a program we have to run. Now, there are evangelistic presentations. There are evangelistic programs. I've done both of those. That's great. So again, this is not like limited or exclusive, right? But what we tend to think is evangelism equals presentation program. And I mentioned this morning, it can be as simple as gossiping the good news. Okay? And so as you're talking, listen, we do this all the time. As you're talking with people, this is the most natural thing ever. Here's an example that is completely non-spiritual, non-faith related. Let's say I'm in a conversation, and I'm talking with a group of guys, and we're having a conversation about basketball. We're talking about basketball and this thing that happened in a game, and there's this clutch shot that took place, buzzer beater right at the end of the game, all this stuff. And I might be in the mood to talk about football for whatever reason. Okay, I'm just looking forward to football season. I want to talk about football. So I might say, yeah, that's just like that end of the game touchdown, last seconds. And I make that link. And one of two things is going to happen. Either this group of guys is going to shift, is going to pivot and start talking about football with me. And I'm going to be as happy as can be because I wanted to talk about football. Or they're going to completely ignore me and keep talking about basketball. And I'm going to keep talking about basketball too because I'm not a jerk. We do this all the time in conversations. We just feel like a faith conversation is exclusively some sort of special program or special presentation. Again, there are evangelistic presentations, there are evangelistic programs, and many of them are great. But it also can be as simple as engaging in conversation. Okay? It can be as simple as engaging in conversation and naturally bringing up those elements of faith. And I can't tell you how many people have talked to me following these kind of things or other kind of trainings and different things we've done, and they'll just say, you mean I can just talk to someone about God and just start wherever they're ready to start and whatever they want to talk about? And we're like, yes, you can. But that's not how we've been programmed to think. We think I got to have this very formal presentation. I got to close the deal in this conversation, whether they're ready or not. That's kind of how we're wired. We've kind of somehow programmed our thinking that way. And I don't think it's any one person sat down and said, let's get everyone doing it this way. It just kind of evolved. But that's kind of how we've kind of programmed ourselves. So I'll give you some more examples that are faith related. So one time I was I got a ride from a guy. I didn't really know him. He was a gypsy cab. That means an illegal cab in New York, but I needed a ride. And so I'm sitting up front with him, and we're talking together. And he was from the islands. He's from Jamaica. Big fan of Bob Marley, if you know who that is. He's talking about, yeah, oh, good. People with taste. He's talking about, just kidding if you didn't shake your head. But so he's talking about Bob Marley music, and I like Bob Marley, so I can talk about Bob Marley's music. And we're going back and forth talking. He's talking about different lyrics, and I honestly forget which lyrics he was talking about. But I said, oh, that's like something Jesus said. We need to be people who make peace. And he ignored me and kept talking about Bob Marley's lyrics. He wasn't looking to have that conversation. He heard me. I was sitting right here. Okay, I turned and faced him. He heard me. Now, what would it have done if I was like, no, really, Jesus, peace. Did you hear me? No. I mean, he would have pulled over and be like, get out right now. I mean, what would that, again, would that have brought him to faith? I think somehow we're wired to think that's how it's supposed to go. We're wired like I got to get him. No, if he's not open, he's not open. If he doesn't want to have the conversation, what is my forcing it going to do? But I dropped that in there. Do I have any idea whether maybe he actually thought about Jesus? Maybe. I don't know. But I'm going to plant the seed. And often, I have many experiences reaping where others have sown. And I've sown where others have reaped. Because it's not about us. It's about God's kingdom. Right? But in that moment, he definitely was not open to the conversation. I was in another place. I was in a place in Tampa, in a little cafe, and they're usually pretty busy in there, but I had the opportunity, as one of the earlier visits to the place, and I had an opportunity, the guy that owns the place and does most of the cooking in the back, and we're talking together, and it is really, really good. And as we're talking back and forth, I said to him, listen, I wanted to make sure just to drop that seed that, again, I'm a person of faith. When he sees me again, I want to just for that to be out there. And he's from a Muslim background. They actually have a restaurant in Ramallah. And I said to him, well, let me back up. Let me make sure you understand something, that with people from Islamic background, I don't want to overgeneralize 1 billion people. But what we found in our experience is, if you don't share something about your faith early in the relationship, they don't think you take it very seriously. What are the two things that Americans are not supposed to talk about? That is politics or religion, isn't it? That's a new one. I think Americans talk about sex all the time. But, politics or religion. This thing here, I've done it a lot. I want to thank you for a new experience. So that was good. I wasn't ready for that. That was good. The answer is always the same until today. Okay. All right. So, politics and religion. Which is the answer I always get. Until today. It was funny. What are the two things that most people, again, I don't overgeneralize, but that most people from most Muslim backgrounds in the Middle East want to talk about? Politics and religion. It's our cultural baggage. We have cultural baggage that says that's off limits. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to convert right away. One of the sayings in the Middle East, by missionaries in the Middle East, is it takes 1,000 cups of coffee for a Muslim to come to Christ. It is deeply relationship oriented, okay? Deeply relational. And so, again, that real, fast, get around, go kind of thing, that doesn't play most of the time. Again, unless someone else has done the sowing and you just happen to be there for the reaping. But it's a long process. So I'm talking to this guy, and again, I'm giving you that background kind of about the culture to say I want to make sure that he hears I'm a person of faith early in discussions with him. I want to signal that very early so he knows I take it seriously. So we're talking about food, kind of like gardening. We're talking about food. And I said, God has given you an amazing gift of how you cook that you really can share with people. And he says to me, yeah, I have this gift and I hope I get to share it with many more people. Again, heard me, responded positively. And shortly after that, the conversation kind of wound down. We didn't get real deep, but I wanted to signal to him, I'm a person of faith. There's another occasion, another guy I know, he had a little cafe, a little coffee shop, kind of pastry and coffee shop place. I went in there right after it opened. By the way, if a new business is opening and you're one of their first customers, there's an appreciation there where if you're talking about starting to be able to open up faith conversations with somebody, if you ever run a business, you get those first customers, you love them, don't you? And so, so I saw it was a brand new business, so I go in there, I start talking, how's it going, how's business? We get to talking. Later, he ended up selling that place, owned a mechanic, so I changed where I went for an oil change. I had to pay like $10 more. But I started going there because I wanted to talk to him. I wanted to have an opportunity to encounter him and keep the conversation going. Yeah, just being intentional about where I am and what my rhythms are going to be. But I'm in there. This is when he owned the little cafe. I go in there. And it's probably my second time in there. And I had somebody with me. I had like an intern or college student or something, and we're talking. And I had the opportunity to lean in and just say, yeah, we're followers of Jesus. And he says to me, he goes, oh, I've read the Bible some. I've looked into it. He's not a Christian. He says, I've looked into that. I've read the Bible some. So guys, I went for it, man. I'm like, yes, So I start going straight for death and resurrection and Jesus, and I am going for it. And you know what he did? He literally, physically started walking backwards in that conversation. Do you know what I did? I changed the subject. And you know what he did next? He started literally physically walking back into the conversation. Sometimes we got to read the room. Okay? But I did that. I changed the subject because I don't want to leave that is a taste of his mouth in our conversation. I wanted to know that I would engage him as a person. That I'm not just the Christian coming to kind of hit him with my spiel. I want him to know you're a person to me. And so, we re-engaged, we talked, it wound down. I'm in that same place, same guy, another time, and my wife was with me, and there was another customer in there and him, and we all start talking. And then he asked me what I do. It's pretty hard to get around that one. And so I try to have creative ways to answer, but I think in this case I said I'm a teacher of the Bible. I try not to use a lot of religious language because I don't know what their assumption is about what those words mean to them. But I said I'm a teacher of the Bible, and he goes, oh yeah, and he goes, that's interesting. And we start talking, and he starts asking questions, and we have this conversation about stuff in Scripture. And eventually he had to get some of his coffee, so it wound down pretty naturally, and it was all very positive. Same guy. A third time I'm in there. Same guy, same place. I have a couple of college students with me. We got some coffee and cake. They're over there, looking at all the little cute desserts and stuff. And I'm at the register, and I'm taking care of the bill. And I'm talking to him. We're talking about current events. We're talking about how crazy things are, which tells you when this conversation took place. Not at all, because there's always crazy things going on. We're talking about current events. And I said, yeah, something like Jesus said. And I quoted exactly. Again, I try not to do a lot of religious jargon and stuff, but I quoted exactly. I say it exactly how Jesus said it because I was quoting. And I said, that's something like Jesus said. He said, you got to be wise like serpents, innocent like doves. And he goes, uh-huh, and just keeps checking me out at the register. Same guy that last time was real interested. A fourth time I'm in there. My wife with me again. We're sitting drinking our coffee. For whatever reason of the day, no one was coming and going. We were probably talking for about an hour and a half. I'm weaving in and out of references to the gospel and Jesus, things that Jesus did in the Bible and things he said. At one point, he's shedding tears, telling us things from his life that is going on in his world, things he's been through. Same guy. Is he open? Is he not open? Because if you base it on two of the encounters, not very open. You base it on a couple of other encounters, we got an ongoing dialogue happening here. It's not just receptive to the conversation, it's receptive to the conversation in that moment. Okay? It's receptive to the conversation in that moment. Don't you live your life where sometimes you just don't want to deal with anything? I mean, I don't think we're the only ones. Sometimes, we got some stress, and I just don't want to go that deep. And I mean, that's just how I'm feeling, right? But I'm going to deal with you as a person, as a human, right? As we interact together. Do I want you to come to believe and follow this? Yes, with all my heart. But part of that gospel that I'm following teaches me to treat people with dignity and respect and unconditional kindness. So that's what I'm going to do, right? That's what I'm going to exhibit, including in our conversations where I hope to share faith, and maybe I do, and maybe I don't get to, but I'm still going to interact with you that way as a full person. And so we're talking back and forth, and this guy, he seems open sometimes, and other times he wasn't that open to have the conversation in that moment. And that's why I say when we talk about spiritual statements, you make that spiritual statement, and then next time you see them, do it again. Again, I'm not talking about hijacking the conversation. In a 20-minute conversation, you make one spiritual statement, that's like 7 seconds, maybe, tops, And so again, you're not hijacking the whole conversation. If they don't want to respond, they don't respond in that moment. But we just think about casting seeds and seizing our conversation. That, again, this is a first practice. It's not everything we can do in evangelist discussions and evangelistic conversations and engagement, and there are formal programs and all the stuff, right? But this is a way that every single person in this room could be seasoning their conversations and essentially scattering seeds, in your everyday interactions. And imagine if everybody in this room was doing that. Let's be real. Most of those statements are going to be ignored. Not some, probably most, but some won't be. And that's the whole thing of scattering lots of seeds. To reap abundantly, you have to sow abundantly. Okay? And so this is a very simple practice that anybody can do. You can be scared, you can be shy, but if you talk to other humans, you can do this. Now again, it might take some practice because you want it to naturally fit the conversation. Even like the one I was ignored in, talking about Bob Marley, it naturally fit the conversation. That comment about gardening naturally fits the conversation. Movies are either they don't have to be a Christian movie. There's so many movies that have message like spiritual symbolism and all kinds of stuff that can start a conversation. Even stuff that's like whack crazy but still points in that direction, that starts a conversation. There's all kinds of things in our culture, in our life experience, where we can just season and salt our conversations and be okay when they're ignored. Okay? Sometimes it's not even because the person is completely closed. They're not looking to have the conversation right now. So next time, every time you see them, we'll just keep trying to do that. And have these make these spiritual statements and conversations. Here's the exercise I want to have you do. I don't see a lot of writing implements. You guys can maybe talk if we're not writers here. But some of you guys are.
I have to write.
Yeah, and phone people. I don't do it that way. You could turn and talk, or you could sit and contemplate, or you could write on your phone or your pad. You could do it whatever you want to do, whatever works for you. But here's what the exercise is. This first thing I want you to do is I want you to think about the themes or topics of conversation that you normally have. If we went around the room, we would hit all the major themes. Things like work and economics and job. It's going to be things like in education. It's going to be things like recreation and hobbies and movies and arts and those kind of things. It's going to be family. It's going to be health. Routines and errands. It's going to be, current events. Be careful with current events, but it's going to be all of. If we went around the room, we would cover all the major themes. But the question is, what are the themes or topics of conversation that you frequently have? So the first thing to do is kind of list those out. Maybe it's 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 things that you're like, man, I end up in these kind of conversations all the time. And so those are conversations you have a lot. And then what I want you to do is, corresponding to those topics, just brainstorm, and I want you to hear me clearly on this, brainstorm some potential, and I'm going to emphasize this a little bit, double down on this, potential spiritual statements that might naturally enter those conversations. I said it the way I said it on purpose. I'm not looking for you to be scripted. When you're scripted, a memorized line, you force that into a conversation, it might not fit in. And then people are looking at you like you have two heads, and you're like, oh, I can't do this, and you're discouraged. And okay. And I can tell you stories of like people really not doing this well, and they keep practicing and they get better. Okay, and we'll try to fit some of those in here. But the point being, I don't want you to be scripted, but I do want you to be practiced. That's two different things. Being scripted is a memorized line that I'm trying to force into a conversation somewhere. Being practiced is I'm getting accustomed to saying these kind of things and these kinds of conversations so that I can, bring up these statements in a natural way that fit, and they begin to roll off my tongue because I'm practiced at it. And there's two kinds of practice. There's the practice we're doing here, the practice you can keep doing at home, and there's the practice of doing it in real life, which is like not just practice. But that's how you learn this. You learn this by doing it. It's learning by doing. This here today, everything we're doing today is a jump start. It's not the real learning. The real learning is putting into practice. That's the real learning. Everything today is a jump start. So, write down or contemplate or talk to the person beside you, whatever works for you, depending on your scenario. Write down what are the topics or themes of conversation that I typically have. Think about what those are. And then, what are some spiritual statements that might naturally, spontaneously, organically enter into those conversations? Okay? And again, not to be scripted, but to be practiced. Just thinking through what some of these might be that could enter into those conversations. And I'll give you a few minutes to work on that. Yeah, that's the question. Yeah, it's an exercise of spiritual statements. What are the topics or themes that you normally talk about? What are some potential spiritual statements that might fit those? And again, to be practiced, not to be memorized and scripted. So talk to me about what are some of the spiritual statements you guys came up with? Like what's a topic or a theme, and what's something that, maybe popped in your mind?
The weather.
The weather? Okay. Yeah, we need rain. You know what's funny? I would tell people when I was first doing this, don't tell me weather, because that's like what you say in an elevator to kill the silence. But then I was doing one of these in Houston, like months after a hurricane, and I was like, okay, fair enough. That's something you can talk about the weather.
Number 2 was family.
Yeah.
People like to talk about family.
Yeah. What's a spiritual statement that might come up?
Where do you go to church, or where does your family go to church?
Okay, so where's your family go to church? Okay, that could be potential. Yeah. Okay, what else? What are some spiritual statements that came up?
You're worried or nervous about something, pray about it and let the Lord help you.
Okay, yeah.
Just pray about it.
Pray. Yeah.
And leave it in there.
Yeah. I might even combine that with like, man, it really helps me to pray, and I feel like God gives me peace. Like even just kind of framing that and like something that God kind of directed to God. Yeah. What else?
Hardwood. Woodworking was one of the conversations.
Okay. Is there something you would, a spiritual statement you'd make connected to that?
I might do that, yeah. Jesus was a carpenter.
Yeah, you could say something about that, like Jesus is a carpenter. You could also say, I might also say, man, it's like, man, just like we have a creator, he made us creative. Something like that. Even something like that in terms of working with something along those lines.
Usually when I'm talking to somebody, I usually, it comes up naturally, or the conversation always comes to me about God.
Yeah.
I never go out of my way to bring it up.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like the Holy Spirit moves through you.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Of course.
And I
Yeah.
if I do go above and beyond to make it known, it's not as natural whenever they bring up questions about religion.
Sure. Yeah. I think that spiritual statements is something where it's not forcing it down their throat. It's not, but it is signaling to people that it sounds like people know you're a person of faith, but it is signaling to people that maybe don't know that you are. But it's also opening up the potential for conversation. And I'll tell you one of the things, and I've heard a lot of like church, where's my family, or a family go to church, those kind of things. Church conversations are fine, but I generally try to encourage people really work on talking about God, about faith, about Jesus, stories in the Bible, those kind of things. Here's why. Because most Christians only know how to invite to church, and that's the extent of their evangelism. And here's the thing. I think if we can talk about God, the realities of Jesus and His kingdom, if we can talk about those things, then the church invitation takes care of itself. But the problem is most of us, that's all we know how to do, and if someone isn't ready for that invitation, we don't know what else to do. That's it. Like, we're done. But if you can talk about God, about Jesus, about things He did, stories He told, if you can have those conversations, then again, the church conversation will take care of itself. You know, and whether that comes up early, later in the relationship, whatever. But most of us, that's where we start. I also think that the church conversation tends to be, especially like in our very diverse world now, where it's all about like, you do you, I do me. It's like, well, great, you do you. But that's not really the deeper questions in life. God made us creative. He called us to care about the environment. These are deeper questions in life. These are bigger these are elements in the bigger story. It's not just, hey, this is kind of what I do. You know what I mean? So that's why we kind of need, I think, sometimes to adjust a little bit. You know, when we center the conversation on, I go to church, do you go to church? Where do I go to church? Where do you go to church? Again, those are fine, and if they come up, great. And sometimes those are the natural things that'll come up in a conversation. What did you do on Sunday? You know, but before the game, you know. But I mean, you know, those are natural things that can come up. So I'm not saying they're off limits. I'm saying they're secondary, maybe tertiary. That if we learn how to have the conversations about God and all things related to God, come from the center out, you know, God, Jesus, you know, being His people, following Him, faith, things He did, stories in the Bible, like we start being able to have those conversations, the church invitation will take care of itself the more you have those conversations, like the deeper it goes. But especially keep in mind, we live in a culture where it really is like, you do you, I'll do me. You go to church? Great. You do you. So that doesn't necessarily bring up something deeper, unless they're low-hanging fruit that are really receptive, they have questions. Well, then that's different.
Reach out to them too. But listening being the most important thing.
Yeah.
If you're reaching out all the time,
Absolutely. And your ear is open to have those bigger life conversations. You know, it's not just a, here's what we do, what do you do, and okay, where do we go from here? It's, let's talk about what is real. Because when we make a claim, like when we're saying, I believe there is a creator, I believe that He came into this world through Jesus, and Jesus actually rose from the dead and continues to be at work in this world and calls us to live a certain way, we're making an extraordinary claim. We are claiming what is real. We are saying, I believe that story is real. I think sometimes, like we do just kind of our religious thing for a long time, we forget that like we're saying something pretty profound. Like we're actually making a stake on what we believe is real about the cosmos. Actually pretty significant. You know? And so what I would say is like try to make spiritual statements that point to that reality. And could you find yourself in some weird philosophical conversations? Yeah. How fun. You know? And so, but I'd say like point to what is real. And so I think that like some of the emphasis on like, you know, what do we do for church? That's fine. And those again might naturally come up, but I'd move those to something secondary. And I'd have those conversations about God and His reign, what He's done and His stories primary. And if you can have those, the church conversations will be really easy. Really easy. Yeah, Michael.
I think this comes back to one of the keep in mind what we're talking about, maybe getting here towards the other parts of the series. But these conversations are not meant to be all-encompassing, ending. This is the beginning point.
Yeah.
Right? And I think
Say first practice.
The point I would make of that is, what would it take to make people your mind
Mhm.
about an important topic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? You're not going to change your mind on God. You're not going to change your mind on your politics because of one conversation, because of one
Yeah.
landed point.
Yeah.
It's going to take a relationship. It's going to take a number of conversations.
Yeah.
This is one conversation, one point of contact. Don't try to do everything.
Yeah.
One.
Yeah, exactly. And I think people, I didn't talk about this some in the book. I mean, people, we engage people, we're starting with what do they even think is probable about the universe? Like if they don't believe in God, is that even something they think is possible? And then we're jumping straight to, this is what the Bible says. Well, do they believe the Bible? And so we had a group meeting, and it was all 100% people that came from a non-church background that would describe themselves as I'm spiritual but not religious, which basically people that say they have no religion in the United States, 72% will also say they're spiritual but not religious. There is an interest in spirituality. But this was all people from that background, and the guy that was leading the group that had started it was going to be away doing some training like outside the country for a couple of months. And he came back and he said, I had two successful things happen while I was gone. He said, one, they kept meeting. He said, two, they kept using the Bible, because this was like such a liberal like Manhattan group. He thought they were going to like start reading poetry or something, and and so he was like, or some self-help book, but he's like, they kept using the Bible. That was success, but so I mean, again, we got to realize, what does someone even think is possible or probable before we get them to even alignment with like who Jesus is, and different people are going to have different starting points all the way along the continuum. It's not a one size fits all, again, we talk to all kinds of people, and believers in Jesus, monotheist, polytheist, atheist, animist, all of it, and again, what's the starting point? What's the starting point? Okay, let me take a pause. I want to have you guys check in. Turn to your tables. What are you hearing? What are you thinking? What are you feeling? Let's do a check-in. I think if it is someone who actually wants to have the philosophical conversation, I'm probably having a free will conversation if they want to have the philosophical conversation. A lot of people are just angry. And so it may be a matter of, I struggle with that. I believe in God. I don't understand everything. And just being real. But, I sometimes ask God that. I believe He's real and He's listening. I'm trying to understand. And here's kind of how I get through that. So again, and that's more of like kind of that more like, that's a ministry conversation, We're ministering to someone, we're meeting someone where they're at, we're relating to them. Again, it depends. Are they wanting to have the philosophical conversation, or are they wanting for just someone to listen because they're angry? And so it kind of it depends. It depends. So, because they'd be like, I'm angry too, but yeah. Sorry.
It almost seems like the bottom line is not so much about where question, but who.
Talk more. What do you mean? Talk more about that.
Well, it's not where do you go to church?
Yeah.
Where do you want to be after, like.
Yeah.
Well, years ago when I was at the Preston Road School of Preaching, they were showing us different approaches.
Sure.
And like, you remember the open Bible study?
Yeah, of course.
First question you asked, do you want to go to heaven?
Yeah.
We actually were told no one time.
Yeah. No, well, and that's the thing. Well, but here's what's happened.
Yeah.
If we're in 1955 or 1925 for that matter, and it's very much, and again in the book I talk in a short chapter about kind of Christendom to post-Christendom. We are in a societal transition right now. And so if you're in a time period where most people are either in church or they're just barely removed from it, like they've had some exposure, some experience. Everyone's seen the Charlie Brown special, like it's like, the Christian story is in the culture. And you say, where are you going to go if you die? And that's street evangelism does this all the time. It's like people on the street, like, where are you going to go if you die tonight? And so I'll tell you a story. I was doing training for a group in New York, a bunch of missionary candidates, and came from all over the country. And this one woman says, they were about 2 weeks into the city. They were there for a year, an apprenticeship thing. And so I was doing a training on learning about other cultures, but beforehand, I just did kind of a warm-up, and I said, hey, you guys have only been here a few weeks. What are you learning? What are you seeing? And this one woman says, well, I was on the train, and I'm sitting beside a Chinese woman, and I ask her, where would you go if you died tonight? And the woman turns to me and says, I just don't ask that question. I never think about that at all. And she looks at me astonished, because she came from like the Midwest or something, and she goes, I've never met anyone like that in my life. And I looked at her and said, I can find you 1 billion people like that. At least. And so, but here's what we don't even understand about, there's definitely some very secular cultures. A lot of Buddhist cultures don't ask that question as well. It's just kind of, it was sort of, it's totally different, but it's weird. It's different. It's a very different narrative. But also secular people in North and the West. And I heard one of the kind of the experts in this talk about this 30 years ago. I didn't like it when I heard it. And after decades of experience, I'm like, yeah, he was spot on. and that secular people here in the West, and I'm overgeneralizing, there will be exceptions, but secular people here in the West are generally not asking the question, where do I go when I die? That's generally not. Now, if there's a funeral they're just at, if there's some sort of like emergency that happens, they just watched a near-death experience documentary, maybe they're asking the question, right? But, their life is near the end. Maybe they're asking the question. But most of the time, what secular people are asking is this good for my life? Is this good for society? That's the question they're asking. And, open Sermon on the Mount, just Matthew 5-7 alone, and the answer is yes on both counts. Live this way, and what happens? Society acts this way, and what happens? The answer is yes. Like, we have a conversation. There's a conversation we can have. The problem is we're starting with the wrong question. Not the wrong question in terms of our theology. I think it's an important question. I'm obsessed with that question. I grew up in church. And so it's an important question. It's terribly important. However, is it the starting point if it's not the question the person is asking? So we want to start with the questions people are actually asking. And and again, I'm overgeneralizing, this won't be true about every individual, but in general, what secular people are asking today is they're saying, is this good? Literally, is the good news good? Is this good? And they've had enough examples that makes them say, bad examples, that makes them say no. And so we have to begin articulating what Jesus said and did that demonstrates that this is good. And so it's a very different set of questions people are starting with. What else? One or two more? What are you hearing? What are you thinking? What are you feeling? Talk about that.
Well, she's been in Christ
Mm-hmm.
20 years on it.
Mm-hmm.
And Cochrane's example was like, I don't feel like if I'm that level. I know a lot, I've experienced a lot, I've been there, done that. I don't have that confidence to go to a stranger or meet someone and like, how are you doing it? And,
Yeah, that's great. I'm gonna hit a couple things here. One, talk about lack of confidence. And you said something about like go out and do, which there's a place for that, certainly. But I would also say a lot of what we're talking about is the as you're going, right? It's the as you're at the doctor's office, as you're sitting at the park next to someone on the bench, and you start bringing up a conversation comes up, as you're, I don't know, playing cards, as whatever, what as you do, in your life, and as you're interacting with other people, it's just letting these matters of faith come up, right? And certainly there is a place for I'm going to this place to do this, of course, but it's also just like as you're moving around in your life. I'd also say this. Everywhere I go, there are usually people who will say to me in churches, I don't have any non-Christian friends. They're sitting in an evangelism workshop and they say, I don't know any non-Christians. And my response is, it's time for a hobby. And so if you don't have those relationships, there is a whole thing we do, and we have some video stuff as well, but there's a whole thing we do. We just kind of walk through a list. I don't have time to put it in this because I don't want to overload. But we walk through a list of like, what are all the various things you might do just to meet people that don't know Jesus? And so really like, and again, I'm not going to pack it in here because I don't want to overload. I just try to do so much. But it's one of the other elements that we try to bring in later sometime. Just say what are the things you could be doing out in your community, in your neighborhood, at your job, whatever it is, like whatever your life rhythms are, to where you're meeting people that don't already know Jesus. Now there's two kinds of people when I go over that. There's the kind of people that already do have a lot of that interaction and contact, and they just didn't see it as a ministry context, and so then they have to go, oh, wait a minute, I do have all these interactions and relationships. I'm just not leaning into them. And then there's the other kind of people that really have insulated their lives from everyone except other Christians, other church people, and they need to get out more. And so like they need to evaluate their life rhythms. What am I doing to put myself in contact with people who don't know Jesus and have those ongoing conversations? You said something about confidence. You hit several themes in that short little bit there. Here's something else. People are often, I could even ask for show of hands, maybe someone will shoot up. People are often scared of and kind of feel the lack of confidence. What if I get a question I don't know the answer? Does anybody feel that? Yeah, there's a few. Okay, there's a few. And so that tends to be a fear. And so what happens is we're paralyzed. We don't do anything because if I get in too deep, I'm out of my depth, right? And that's kind of a fear that we have. I see heads nodding. It's kind of that we're nervous about that. Man, let's disarm that completely. Because actually it is an incredible opportunity to get asked the question when you don't know the answer. And you think I'm a little crazy, but let me break it, let me unpack it for you. So someone asks you a question, you don't know the answer, and here's how I would say responding is you could say, you first practice this with me. Say this, I don't know. I don't know. Thank you. Thank you. Okay? Listen. I'm trying to untrain you. I gotta untrain so we can retrain.
They told us you never say you don't know.
I don't know where that comes from.
But you just say, you know what, you got a point. That's very interesting. I'll look into it, and I know where I'm going to get my answer, and I'll bring it back to you. I'm going to say something similar, but it's going to be tweaked a little bit. But I think you start with I don't know, and here's why that's good. Is one, it demonstrates humility, and a lot of secular people think Christians don't have humility, even though Jesus invented it. Okay, so that's a lot of people's impression that we lack humility, even though that is like a virtue that didn't even exist on our planet until Jesus of Nazareth showed up. Now, seriously, historians did a study. These are secular historians. There's a few Christians, how I know about it. But there's secular historians did a global study of world cultures all around the world, and they asked the question. This is what historians in academia do. They just like ponder these questions. So they said, when did humility become a virtue? And in world history, what this mostly secular group of historians came up with is it started to become a virtue during the time, but through the man Jesus of Nazareth. Up until that point, humility wouldn't have even been a virtue. Think about like shame, honor cultures. Like it wasn't a virtue at all. And so think about Jesus like pushing back on the disciples. That wasn't their virtue, right? So Jesus kind of invented humility, and yet many people think Christians don't have much of it. We've created a problem there. Okay? So by saying I don't know, I am demonstrating some humility because guess what? They already know we don't know everything. They already know, And so we say I don't know, but then I would say I don't know, but there's this group of people that I get with on a regular basis. We talk about these kind of things. We read the Bible together. We discuss these things, and we learn together because man, I learn a lot better with a group of people than all by myself. Can I bring this question to them and then come back to you? Now notice what I did there. It's just a little bit different. I'm not saying I'm going to go study because I am the source of all answers. Yeah. I'm saying there's this community I'm part of, and if you notice,
I'm basically describing your small group, your Sunday school, your ladies' Bible class, whatever it is where you're able to discuss and bring, any place where you could bring this question to a group that has some shared knowledge. If you don't have that kind of community, I suggest having it. But anywhere where you can bring this question to this group where there's shared knowledge. And then what I would say is actually do that. Bring the question, get the feedback, because I'm assuming you actually don't know the answer. Get some feedback, and then come back to them. And here's a few things you've done. First, you've demonstrated humility by saying, I don't know. But then that pivot you make, but I have this group. Now, what I did there is I just described it. If I say my church, or like my Sunday school, or something like that, then I don't know, and this is what I tell people a lot, is I try to use description. Because if I say the word church, I don't know what their definition is. I don't know what their assumptions are. It could be positive, could be negative. I don't know. I want to describe it and see, and if that description resonates with them, then we can get more into what this group is. And if they go, oh, you mean church? Yeah, my church. I'm not lying. Yeah, church. But I just want to describe it because I want to see if this description will connect with them versus their assumptions. If I just use a buzzword, right? I do that with the word Christian. I say I'm a follower of Jesus. Because when I say Christian, what are they thinking? We had a guy reaching out to a guy from Yemen. The guy from Yemen says to him, oh, you mean an immoral person? He was a brand new missionary. He was floored. He's like, what do you mean by that? He says, well, Americans are immoral and Americans are Christian and therefore immoral person. It's very logical, especially if you don't come from a background that separates church and state. Very logical, right? What are we asking people to be? I don't want to go down this road, but I'm just going to float it. Are we asking people to join a particular political persuasion? Is that what we're doing? And they're not interested in that? Like, what are we doing when we say Christian? Right? And so that's the thing, is like, what does it mean? And so I say follower of Jesus because I'm describing something. I'm not using a word that has maybe definitions or assumptions attached to it that I don't know what they're thinking when they hear these buzzwords. So when I say this, when I say, hey, this group I meet with, I'm describing probably my Sunday school class or my small group or something like that, right, that I meet with, that I'm going to bring this question to. Whatever that is. And so I'm describing that. But what I'm doing is I'm pointing to something bigger than myself. I'm not issuing the invitation. I'm not making a hard sell, but I'm just describing something that might appeal to them because they have questions. I'm describing something bigger than myself. And then finally, I'm opening up an invitation to continue the conversation. Hey, I'm going to bring this back. And when I actually do it, when I actually bring the question to this group and we actually talk about it and I get some feedback, and hopefully good feedback, and I come back and then I share with them, hey, here's kind of what we talked about. We're actually showing that we thought about the question and we're actually concerned with what they really wonder about and are thinking. And so here's the thing. Let's disarm the lack of confidence. Not knowing the answer is actually a great opportunity to continue the conversation and include other people in this evangelistic friendship. Now you have a whole Sunday school class or small group or whatever it is that you have that you're sharing with. Now that can be praying for this person and now been part of this evangelistic relationship or part of this process. They're sharing this journey with you. You have a whole support group you just created around this outreach. How cool. All because you didn't know the answer and you were brave enough to still talk. So we got to get a little bit untrained from thinking we have to have all the information. We everybody has to have 5 PhDs to talk about Jesus. And I know those guys. They don't know everything either. Okay? So I mean, we need to kind of get over some of that a little bit. Okay? Hey, I'm going to give you I'm going to say 2 minutes because the secret is I know that means 5. But I'm going to say 2 minutes, stretch break, and then we'll do the rest and come in for landing. We have 2 more practices, and then we'll be done. We'll talk some more. Don't worry. Unless you are worried. Maybe we won't. Now, calling you back together. Hey, you guys! And everyone from the 70s and 80s laughed. All right. Well, good. Okay. Before Goonies, it was Electric Company. So that also dates you whether you just think it's Goonies or when you think it's a lecture company. That also could date you a little bit. Yeah, Goonies are definitely, because you're definitely on the younger side. It was just the Goonies, but yeah. Okay. Next, we'll do a little more debrief and questions and stuff. I'm hoping that's a helpful thing. But we definitely want to do 2 more practices, conversational practices. Remember, the first one we talked about is a first practice. If that's all you did walking out of here and you weren't doing anything before, that moves the needle. And we've made progress, okay? It is a good first practice that anybody can do. It still takes some practice, in real life to kind of let it begin to flow naturally. It's not like you just snap your fingers. It still takes some practice, but it is something that anybody can do, okay? Second, conversational practice we want to walk through. And this will be pretty redundant, right? The exercise gets pretty redundant. What are the themes? What are the topics? The conversations you already have, right? And so then you want to think about what are Bible stories that might naturally enter into those conversations. Bringing Bible stories into our conversation can do a couple of things. One, it could be the starting point. I mean, if that's where the conversation takes it, it could be a natural starting point. I've had many of those. It could also be building on a spiritual statement. You make a spiritual statement, they respond, and you're like, oh, that's like this story, and you get into it, right? So it's sharing Bible stories and conversations. Now, here's a few key things that's also really important. One, 60 seconds or less. That's what you want to practice. This is not the long exegesis, hermeneutical, deep study version of the story. I know, right? It's not the deep Bible study version of the story. I'm a fan of that version. I love that version. I'm kind of fanatical about that a little bit. Like, I love that version of the story. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the seed casting version of that story. Okay? It's the seed casting version. Where, it's just simple. Even like if I'm telling a story about Zacchaeus, I probably don't care that much about his name. Jesus is walking to a city in the Middle East. I don't care that much that it's Jericho. I'll say the short guy really wanted to see Jesus. I probably will say he's a tax collector because every culture in the world gets that. So anybody in the IRS in here? It's just sharing. It's sharing Bible stories and conversations. 60 seconds or less is what you want to practice. Again, not to be scripted, but to be practiced. Okay, we're not trying to be memorized. I'm going to force something in that doesn't fit the conversation, but to be practiced so that these things start to regularly flow off your lips, flow off your tongue. Okay, 60 seconds or less, because you're not hijacking the conversation and turning it into sermon time. That's not what we're doing. We're casting seeds into this conversation of the you version of God's Word. Okay, the short version is going to be a summarized, paraphrased version, right? So it's, you version, right? But again, this is sowing God's Word. It's the paraphrased, summarized version, yes, but it's sowing God's Word into conversations, and I'm convinced that has a transformational power. And that can leave some rocks in some shoes, so to speak, all right? So under a minute or less, because you're not hijacking the conversation. You're in a conversation, and it pivots to this, and you share, that's like this story, and you share a little bit, and it comes up. A second thing is everyday normal language. Listen, man, church people are weird. Church people are weird. We start talking about faith, we start talking about God and the Bible, like all of a sudden we're from the 18th century, and we use these words that nobody uses in any other conversation in life, and like, and some of those, we don't even realize what they are. I was talking to a guy in prison ministry, and he was telling me, and he was in one of these, and he like shared it after. I'm like, you would have really helped me sharing it during. But he's in prison ministry, and he said he even asked the guys in the prison, do you know what the word Lord means? And they were like, no. Think about it. If you're not nerdy into Lord of the Rings and like sci-fi fantasy stuff, when do you use that word outside of church and like fantasy fiction? So if you're not a nerd or you're not in church, That's not a word that comes up in conversation. That's a simple word. That's before we get into like sanctification or, all this other stuff, right? But no, but we start quoting, like we quote from our version of Scripture that was translated 75 or 400 years ago, and I mean, look, people are not fluent in, your King James is fine, but people are not fluent in King James if that's not their background. People don't speak NIV, they don't speak Sunday school. Okay? That's just not how people talk. So can we learn to talk about faith in everyday normal language? I'll tell you a secret. That's what they're doing in the Bible. That's what they're doing in the Bible. So the word Lord, for example, when they shifted from the Jewish context to the Greek context in Antioch, and they started declaring Jesus as Lord, that's because you would say Caesar is Lord. That made sense. It's like saying Jesus is the true emperor of the world. It's a big statement. Will get you killed. But they basically translated this idea to Greek culture. Why? Because there's no messianic expectation among the Greeks like there was among the Jews. Had the same implications. The Jews thought the Messiah will rule the world. The Greeks and Romans think the emperor, the Lord, will rule the world. It was the same implications. But it needed to make sense to the people they're talking to. We could go on and on and on of examples in Scripture. Then the original languages, they're using everyday normal language. They're borrowing words from the Greek culture. They're doing this. And yet we kind of stay rooted in this like religious speak that doesn't make sense to a lot of people, so we lose them. They don't know what we're talking about. We get weird. It's like we're talking about the football game or sport, or like politics or something, and then all of a sudden we start talking about faith in the Bible and like we're from the 17th century, and we just get weird. And so like we just got to learn to be like regular humans and just talk about God like normal people. Yeah. Okay. Somebody's probably already done that, but look here. If you're someone that is hearing me and going, "Oh my goodness, I've been a Christian forever. All I know how to do is speak Sunday school," and you're a little bit terrified by this, and you pull the big words out of like your NIV version or the these and thous, and that's like you start talking that way as soon as you get into talking about God with people in a regular conversation. Here's my suggestion. They're not all created equal, but find a really good children's Bible. That's a good tutor. How do you talk about God in normal language? So if you need some help, find a good children's Bible. Read those stories and try telling them that way. Find a good one, because some of them, a lot of ad-lib in there. But find a really good one and try telling the stories in everyday normal language. Just use that as a tutor. Okay?
I used to read it was Jehovah's Witness stories to my son. They're very simple, and the illustration very simple.
Yeah, I would suggest not Jehovah's Witnesses ones, but yes, children's. Yeah.
I don't know. They brought it to
Yeah.
me. I don't know where I got it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of children's Bibles out there that are good, that are quality, that do a good job telling the story in very normal, simple language. I'm not saying you have to like keep it that elementary, but I'm just saying that's a good tutorial for how to talk normal, okay, when we talk about God, all right? Because we get all religious with non-religious people. That doesn't translate, all right? So we just want to talk about God normal, because the people in the Bible, when they're doing it, that's actually what they're doing. They're talking in the language of the time and of the culture. They're adopting words from the culture that didn't have religious significance yet. Not until they gave it to those words. They're pulling it from the culture, and they're talking in ways that people can understand. And yet we've created kind of a separate dictionary and a separate way of talking and kind of working things out kind of within our religious cultures. And instead, we need to kind of step out of that, and how do we speak about God, about what is real in our world? What is real about our universe? And speak about that in ways that is just, normal. That people can get, that people can grasp. And like I said, if that's a struggle for you, and probably for some it is, for some it isn't, if that's a struggle for you, I recommend finding a good children's Bible and just start reading through the stories again. How do I tell these simply? How do I tell these simply in everyday normal language? There's what I'm going to have you do for an exercise. First, look at your list again. What are themes? You can repeat it as well. What are themes or topics of conversations I already have? Then, what are some Bible stories that might, again, to be practiced, not overly scripted, but some Bible stories that might naturally enter into these conversations. And then, after you come up with some of those, take a minute or two to come up with those. And then, especially some of you guys that are all verbal mode, you may be pivoting quickly. If you're writing down, you can write some of those down. But then, I want you to practice. Get a partner and practice. I know it's awkward. I get it. Okay? It's not real life. You're not in the middle of a conversation. You're just launching into the story. It's weird and it's awkward. But I just want you to practice. I want you to keep it under a minute. If you need to set your stopwatch in your phone, you can do that. I want you to keep that under a minute. I want you to put it in everyday normal language like you would. Again, we're approximating because I know this is just practice at tables in church. But I want you to just practice telling the story like you would if maybe you were bringing that into a conversation. Okay? In everyday life. Okay? So, what are themes or topics that you normally have? What are Bible stories that could speak to some of those topics or themes, that could enter into those conversation topics? And then turn to someone next to you and practice telling one of those stories. There's just major opportunities as we share stories with people. We open up and we share, stories. We enter into conversations, and as they connect with somebody, they connect with where somebody's at. I mean, imagine if you're sitting in prison, you probably have no idea that Jesus ever said anything about you or that you have any value. That's probably the impression you have, that no one would think you have any value. And yet, here is Jesus saying, that's a judgment parable. That's weighty. And so, it connects because that's where they're at. Absolutely. One of the things I know sometimes people struggle with a little bit is if there's someone, maybe newer Christians, maybe, memory issues, whatever it is, they're like, I don't know the stories, and especially newer believers, I don't know the stories. And so I the thing I say to them is two things. One, you can do the spiritual statements. Two, you can do the next thing we're about to do. And three, start reading the stories, and so, just start learning. But you just start wherever you're at. Nothing should really hold us back from having the conversations. And share the stories that you know. It's a pretty common, in a lot of house church movements and village to village context in the majority world and a lot of other parts of the world. You'll have a missionary that shares a story with a new believer, and they'll go share it to the next village, and they're only one story ahead of the next village. And so, share what you know. Share what you know. Another thing that I try to advise people on is recognizing just how you can get to these stories, right? And I just call these just bridge phrases. They're pivot points. I'm talking to someone, and whatever conversation we're having, topic we're having, I may say something like, "Oh, that's like a story I heard," or "Oh, that's like something I read in the Bible," or "Oh, that's something like what God did," or "Oh, that's like a story Jesus told." And so these are all little pivots. And again, if you notice what that is, it's relating to the topic we were just talking about, right? I'm not pulling it out of the air and forcing it in, and they're going, where did that come from? It is related. It's related to what we were just talking about. And then I'm just making that pivot. It's a bridge phrase. I'm bridging it to the next thing that I'm saying about Jesus, about God, and I'm just kind of telling a very simple story. Shorter the better. If it's under 60 seconds, good. Under 20, great. I'm just telling a little story. Now listen, if they find the story interesting, they want to know more, please tell them, okay? Don't stand there going, well, Jared told us 60 seconds. No. You already did that part, You already did that part. Now they want to know more, okay? And so, and again, if they ignore it, fine. It's just like spiritual statements. That is planting a seed. All right? It's planting that seed. But if they respond to it and they want to know more, by all means, talk more about the story. Fill in some of the gaps. Talk about the implications. By all means. Notice what I did there too, and it's very subtle, but what I did with some of those examples of bridge phrases. Like one of them I said, oh, that's like something I read in the Bible, because maybe this is someone I've already been engaging with them on the value of opening up the Bible, and I kind of want to keep stoking that curiosity. So I may go directly Bible. Maybe we've just been having conversations about God, about Jesus, so and that's kind of where we're living. So like, oh, that's something God did, that's a story Jesus told. And that's kind of where we're living in our ongoing dialogue and conversations. And so I may point in that direction. The other one I mentioned, I may say something like, oh, that's like a story I heard. So maybe I'm talking to someone that's very skeptical, maybe a little bit hostile, and I don't even tell them where it came from. I just tell them the story. And if I do it enough times and they start saying, well, where are you getting these stories? Oh, well, it's actually the Bible. Again, I want to wait until they actually like the stories, like they're connecting with them, they're relating to them. And then it's like, oh, wait, that thing that I have disdain for that I never read, that I hate and I don't know why. I'm being a little facetious. But, that's where these stories come from. And so again, I may do a different bridge phrase just based on the nature of the conversation, the nature of the person, and kind of where we are in the journey. It's not a one-size-fits-all, right? But just using those bridge phrases, maybe you made a spiritual statement and the conversation is going, you're like, yeah, and just like, and you lean into a story. Or it might be just like a spiritual statement, the story is the first thing that comes up because you're having this conversation. You're like, oh, this really relates. Jesus tells a story just like that. Jesus gives a warning about dissing people in prison. Just laying that out, and making those bridge phrases, because that allows you in the context of everyday conversations, right? Everyday conversations, that bridge phrase, it's relating it to what you were just talking about, which means it needs to relate to what you were just talking about, okay? And then you kind of make that pivot, that bridge phrase, and then this story that happened, this thing. And again, you're not hijacking the whole conversation. This is the seed-casting version of the story. So the shorter, the better. It's the paraphrase, summarized version of the story. God still works through that, okay? So you just, you share that in the conversation. If they respond and that elicits more conversation, it brings up questions, great. Now you're in a spiritual conversation. Awesome. If they don't, it's okay. It's the seed-casting version of the story that landed in this conversation, connecting to something you were just talking about. Thoughts, questions? Okay, one more to do. Pretty redundant, once again. What are the themes or topics of conversations you already have? Right? So you want to kind of look or think about that list that you've already made twice already. What are the themes or topics of conversations you already have on a regular basis, besides the weather? and then think about how your story or stories, and I'll unpack this a little bit before you guys do practice and stuff. Think about your story or stories that might speak to those themes or topics. And there's two kinds of stories that you tell. The first is your big story, your story with God. Before Christ, encounter with Christ, continuing with Christ. If you've never outlined that three-part play, that three-act play, in a very short, brief fashion, it's a good idea to do so. Right? What is your big story? Before Christ, encounter with Christ, continuing with Christ. All right? And so that's the first kind of story you'd share. Now here's what I encounter sometimes. I would be willing to bet there's people thinking about it, thinking this, sitting here in this room now. People will say, I don't have a story. What they mean is they don't have a dramatic story.
I grew up in the church.
Because they grew up in the church. What they mean is they don't have a dramatic story. Now, you have a story. Your story is just different. Your story is generational faithfulness. But you have a story. You can still tell that story. Before Christ, kind of, starts pretty young. Like there's not really a before so much as like I grew up kind of learning this, and then I made a decision, and that's more like your story. Maybe part of your story, again, you still want to keep it, we're still talking short, 60 seconds or less. This is the seed casting version of your story. But maybe your story even starts with, so-and-so became a believer and it passed down and then I made the decision. Like that may be your story, right? And so it's a story. You may have a story of generational faithfulness. If you're someone who started young, always grew up in church, grew up Christian family, all that good stuff, right? Now, does your story fit every conversation that you might have with somebody? No, of course not. It'll fit some of them. But just like the guy who, started giving his life to Jesus when he was on getting off a binge, sleeping off in a jail cell, his story doesn't fit every conversation either. If it did, it'd be pretty weird. Okay, so, so again, you don't have a dramatic story, but you have a story. Just a matter of framing that story and how you tell it. And it may even start a few generations back. Still keep it short. And so this is the seed casting version. And so, but you have a story. It's just how you frame it. So there's your big story, right? So before Christ, leading up to Christ, encounter with Christ, following Christ, right? Continuing with Christ. That's your big story. Same principle, under a minute or less. This is the seed casting version. Your hour-long version, sitting across from a cup of coffee with a friend in a diner late at night, great version. Wonderful version. Your 10-minute version on a stage somewhere, great version. Very cool. That's not this, okay? This is the seed casting version of your story. Same principle applies as well. This is a little harder because now we're talking about us. Really we're talking about our lives pointing to God, but it involves us. So it's a little bit harder, but when you get ignored, it's okay. Let them. Okay? It's still okay. We don't need to get offended by that, even though now we're talking about me, right? But really, we're just trying to point to God and how He's worked in our life. Okay? So again, this is the seed casting version. Under a minute or less, everyday normal language. We still tend to get religious on this. Let me tell you my testimony. No, just tell the story. Talk normal. Hey, this is something that happened. This is kind of how my life went, right? And that's your big story. But then you also have stories, plural, in your life. And these are all the episodes that point to God in some way. These are all the different things that have happened. And again, these are seed casting for pointing to God, right? So these are things that have happened in your life where God was present in some way, all right? And so the longer you've been around, the more of these episodes you have, okay? Some of us have a lot of episodes, but you have these episodes in your life that you can share, okay? And so as you're talking, different episodes in your life, different encounters, different ways that God worked in your life may naturally fit different conversations that you're having, right? So again, I go back to what are the themes or topics of conversation you already have, that you frequently have in your routines and your life rhythms and the people that you encounter. And what are some of your stories, whether your big story or the different things that have taken place in your life that may naturally enter into those conversations? And I'm not looking for you to be scripted to force some memorized lines, but to be practiced so that these stories roll off your tongue very naturally. And that does start with being practiced. Here's another thing. Don't be afraid of present tense stories. Sometimes our stories are, I went through something and it was hard. Sometimes our stories are, I'm going through something and it's hard. And because we feel like Christians have to have all the answers and have it all together, we're afraid to tell those stories. Again, I got a secret for you. Folks out there already know we don't have it all together. They already know. Okay? So when we share, hey, I'm really going through something right now, and this is what it is, and but I am leaning on God and trusting Him. Again, we're pointing to God, that He's walking with us. And He even said, I don't understand it all. I get frustrated. I complain to God sometimes, but I trust Him. And opening up that present tense story, it demonstrates transparency, and it demonstrates humility. And for some people that have had nothing but bad experiences with religious folk, that will be refreshing. And they might even respect you more. And we may be afraid of that because we are being vulnerable with somebody who does not live a life of faith, and so that might make us a little nervous. The vulnerability is real. You could get hurt. we also follow someone who died on a cross. So, yeah, it could hurt. I mean, it's a risk, right? But I would just say don't be afraid of sharing present tense stories as well, because we feel like we have to project that we have it all together, and they already know better. They already know, okay? So feeling free to share those stories. So what we're going to do, I'm going to have you guys practice. You're going to think about what are the themes or topics I already have that I frequently talk about. What's a story, whether your big story or a smaller story, an episode from your life that you would share, and you can share that with someone beside you. Now listen, if you're not like married to the person beside you or someone it's not like your best friend or something like that, and like you don't want to share one of the deeply personal stories, that's okay. Pick another one, okay? Like just, the point is practice, okay? Again, themes or topics that you already have. Big story or stories, episodes in your life. Pick one. Pick one you think might come up in conversations you have that could naturally enter into that. 60 seconds or less, everyday normal language, like you're just having a conversation. And remember, this is a story that points to God. It's not just your fishing story, okay? Unless God showed up in some way, like you're being eaten or something, and He saved you. That's different. But a story that points to God. So turn to someone next to you. Ready, set, go. Cool deal. Okay, guys. So kind of recapping everything for a moment. We want to scatter lots of seeds. Part of that is more people in the faith community attempting to share and enter into conversation. And part of that is each individual seasoning their conversations, interactions with others on a regular basis. We are looking for people that are receptive to the conversation, not just a conversion right away, but they're receptive to the conversation. They're open to engage in the conversation, and they're open to the conversation in that moment. It might be hit or miss. Sometimes it's not happening, and sometimes maybe it is with the same person. As we encounter people, as we build these evangelistic friendships, we're creating the mosaic of the gospel. Right? And each time we're laying down a few more tiles. So each conversation, you make a spiritual statement, you're sharing Bible stories, you start sharing your story, it turns this way, it turns that way, something happens in conversation, we didn't talk about it today at all, but it was amazing, and now you're praying for them and all this stuff, and they're like crying, and you're like, Jared didn't even tell us about this. And so, and it's like, great. But you're entering into this with people, and each time you're laying down a few more tiles as you create the picture of the mosaic. And then 3 conversational practices that you can start with. One is a simple first practice of making spiritual statements. That's something anybody can do. And yes, if it turns into a larger conversation, great, have it. And if things come up that you don't really know how to respond to, great. Ask them to allow you to check with other people and come back and talk more and enter into an ongoing dialogue. You're learning together. And that is part of the posture shift that has to take place. Instead of, I am the source of all knowledge and wisdom and inspiration and come to me for all things, let's take a journey together as we learn about who Jesus is. See how that simple change in posture and expectation changes the whole equation? That change in posture suggests that anybody can do it. But as long as we stay shackled to, I have to be the source of all knowledge and all, I got to be better than Jesus on morality, and I got to be I'm exaggerating, but as long as that's our mentality, we will remain shackled and do nothing. But you are freed, you are unleashed when I'm simply on a journey inviting other people to take this journey with me as we learn together. That is a very different way of approaching things. It's more human, and it looks a lot like the kingdom, I think, as we interact with people. It looks a lot like the fruit of the Spirit as we walk this out with people. And so sharing spiritual statements, sharing Bible stories, sharing your story or stories are just 3 simple practices that you can begin integrating into conversation and your everyday interactions and your common rhythms. I've even found, we did this at a church, and they actually did experience significant growth, not promising that, obviously, but they saw that. But what was interesting was is they took what we're talking about today and they actually infused it into one of their programs, like community lunch thing, and it had results because and I'll tell you, in the beginning they were doing things like they had always done them. They were scaring people off. Let's get the decision. Let's get them baptized. And they were just they literally come talk to the preacher. They're literally scaring people off. I mean, literally, people were being scared off and not coming back. And then they did this training. They incorporated it, and they started just sitting across from people and having dialogue and having relationships. And it was in the context of this like community lunch people were coming to, and I'll tell you something else they did too that was smart in a minute. But they started having people come. It's a church of like 260, and they added 40 people a year later. Again, I'm not saying that happens all the time, but it happened there because they actually changed their posture and how they were engaging people. They went from scaring people off to having people come and be part of their community and take the journey with them. And the thing is, and when I told a little bit, it's the same church, told a little bit of that story this morning in Sunday school. Like we didn't teach them a program or a presentation. Obviously, we taught them a way of engaging people. They infused that into one of their programs. And it actually made a difference. It actually made it more effective at connecting with people and building genuine relationship and inviting people to take a journey with them. They actually did something else that was smart that I should add to that story. It was a community. The context, again, I'm not here to like advocate this program or that program because every context, every city is different, every situation is different. So that's not what we're doing here. But just as a principle to capture, one of the things they did is for this lunch program is they had other rooms, but they set it up in the lobby and they had glass doors to their building because they understood something. They have to earn the trust of their community. So people could literally physically see in without going into the inner sanctum. And this might seem shocking to church people, but why trust us? Like, how do you know we're not a cult? Like, how do you know? Like, why trust us? Like, I'm going to go where? Like, what's happening in there? And if that seems weird, how many of you have visited a mosque, a Hindu temple, a Buddhist temple? Well, yeah, you've been to Thailand, but yeah, but I mean, like, yeah.
Like, we were just in Nebraska,
Mm-hmm.
and it was York. Anyway,
Mhm.
we were in Nebraska, and I'm sorry, I don't remember. It was with Mary Neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
Fredericksburg, and then again in
Mm-hmm.
they had that glass wall you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just right in front. There's this sanctuary.
Sure.
And of course, we walked in, and I was like, what?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It just didn't
Sure.
seem right at all.
Yeah. And these were the doors to the outside, so someone doesn't even have to come in. They can look in. Oh, it's happening right there. And the reason I share that isn't to get you to like remodel your building or something, but the reason I share there's a principle behind that, and that is they understood they had to earn the trust of their community, and so their transparency in their case was not just figurative but literal, and that's the principle is understanding that like if you're not from the church, why trust the church? Why? Do you trust the neighborhood mosque? Like, why? And so, I mean, I had this experiences in New York. I knew I was a true New Yorker when this happened, because New York is suspicious of everything. And so I was walking along. So previously we had like short-term mission groups come, and we had them at one point we were just trying different things. We had them give out water bottles, like a label for the ministry on there, something, a number to call, and they would give free water. It was something to try. Didn't do anything, but we're trying it. And so we had done that, right? We had previously done that. I'm walking along, and there in front of a bodega, that's a corner store for non-New Yorkers. In a corner store, and most of the corner stores in the Bronx are owned by people from Yemen. And so in front of this corner store, it was a mosque that was using this corner store, and they're giving out free water bottles. I take a water bottle in true New Yorker fashion. I'm like, hope this is okay. I hope they didn't put anything in it. And we had done the same thing, And so I was like having this moment going, boy, that's what people were thinking when our guys were, were doing that. But you know, and I mean, and that's again, that was just being again, that's really a true New Yorker. But I heard another story. The same guy is a firefighter that, like, you know, I don't know if you ever heard the Alpha course, came out of the Anglican Church, but it's kind of an introduction to Christianity. A lot of different groups use. And he went to, and they have like at the end they invite people to invite their friends so they can try to spin off the next one, right? And he comes to it. He said he was at this. I heard him speaking at this conference, and he said he was sitting there. He goes, man, I'm a New Yorker. I'm like, I didn't eat any of the food. He's like, I was afraid that like it's poison or something. You know, like what's going on? You know, and he's in a church. I mean, he's in a church building. You know, again, if we've grown up in this or we've been in this for a long time, we may not realize that people on the outside are like, what's going on in there? Is it okay? So again, I don't tell you that to say like, use this program or do this thing. That's not what we're doing today. But giving you that example to draw out the principle that we have to earn trust. We have to earn trust. So we're going to come in for a landing very quickly. But questions, thoughts, it's kind of our last Q&A moment. So questions, thoughts, proclamations, complaints, fights. All right, what do we got? I'll warn you out? All right. Okay.
You got a question for me? What did I do? Oh,
Getting closer.
Yeah.
she may not be, but she does.
Yeah, a good person. Yeah. Okay, have the conversation. You know, I mean, and here's the thing. Here's one of the things here's one of the things I do try to share is that after talking about all this relationship conversational stuff, there might be a tendency for some people to be like, well, I got to really hold back. And then if you hear that, you heard the wrong message. You know, it is scattering those seeds very proactively, just not in an obnoxious way, you know, like just really connecting with people relationally, like a human being, having conversation, and really like bringing this into that conversational approach. Now, also, I do think as you're creating the mosaic, as you're engaging people, maybe someone you've known for 20 years, you know, all those kind of scenarios where there are moments where you want to make a direct challenge or ask a direct question. There are absolutely those moments. Now, is it, you know, the third conversation or the 30th conversation? I don't know. It depends on the person. It depends on the relationship. Depends on the situation. I have no idea. It could be really early or really down the line. Depends. And that's why when we talk about the idea of really direct challenge, direct question, we attach the word discernment to it. You have to discern this because there's not one answer. You know, so is there a moment for that? And then sometimes that's the moment. We had a guy in Atlanta at a church go through training, and then he said, man, I got this friend that I've known for 20 years. We've never talked about faith. We've never talked about Jesus. So I called him up and said, let's go play golf, you know, and have the conversation. He said, hey, we need to talk, you know. And so, I mean, there's those moments, there's those relationships. And again, you may start dialoguing with someone, and down the line, you start really sensing that, hey, I need to really kind of ask a very direct question to kind of see where they're at. And again, but I think it's a matter of discernment. The problem is, the way we've done things in the church leading up to this point is, we start with direct, the middle is direct, we end with direct, and that's all we know how to do, you know? And it's all like cold call, you know? And so like, that's all we know how to do. There are moments for the direct, really challenge or a direct question. There's the moments for it. But again, it's a matter of discernment. Could it be the first conversation? Maybe. Could it be, 20 conversations later? Maybe. It just depends. But again, I think that's a matter of discernment. I really do think, I'm not trying to get overly charismatic with you, but I think it's always walking with the Spirit, and really discerning that, in the particular relationship and situation. But I do think there's times for that as well.
Could it be hopeful? Train up a child, Proverbs 22:16, train up a child in the way he should go.
Mhm.
You know, we're children.
Mm-hmm.
We become babies in Christ. You know, train up a child in the way he should go, he will not depart.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard of stories like that.
Mm-hmm.
Even
Sure.
if they're dying bed or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
Or they got a sickness.
Sure.
My brother is very sick,
Mhm.
all kinds of surgeries. And he says, I knew I was going to come out of the surgery. The doctor said, Mr. Garcia, can I pray for you?
Mm-hmm.
Can you?
Yeah.
Oh, that
Yeah, sure.
They were putting hymns on
Yeah.
the intercom there.
Yeah.
He said, sister, of course I was going to
Yeah.
come out great.
Yeah, yeah, and that kind of gets to, actually kind of reminds me of here's an important thing to remember as well. What I want to encourage you, especially when I talk about using normal language, just connecting to people where they are, I want to encourage you that every new person you meet, everybody you start, or even someone you know but you don't know that much about their faith background or whatnot, every person you talk to, assume that they're more, that they're kind of outside of belief, outside of discipleship, that they're an unbeliever, pre-believer, whatever you want to call it, like that they're more secular, that they're outside of our Christian experience. Start with that assumption, and then you start talking to them, and you find out that, you know, they're actually like a super Christian. You're like, great, we have that in common. Or you find out that maybe, like you were saying, they've been dropped out for a while, but they actually have that background. Then that's the conversation you know to have. But what happens is we start most of our conversations just assuming that it's someone that's so close to our church experience that that's the only conversation we can have, and we're missing everybody out here. It's kind of like, I mean, if you shoot for the target out there, you're going to get it out there, and then everything in between. But if you just shoot for here, that's all you're going to get. And so we have to think in terms of like, okay, all our engagements, we're meeting people, let's just assume people don't come from any background, don't have any faith, don't have any biblical understanding. Let's just assume that with everyone we talk to. That's why I use everyday normal language, assume that. Now, if you start talking to them about faith, and they switched all the religious jargon and the big words and stuff because they have a background, cool, you're bilingual, you can switch with them. And so you can have that conversation. But I mean, just recognize that, just assume that everyone you're talking to isn't that. And then again, if you find out they are, then adapt. But it's kind of like we gotta kind of go for the goal out here, because if you're shooting for people that are like really lost, really outside the church, really outside of Christian faith, have no background, if that's who you're reaching for, you'll have the church dropout, the person who maybe lost their faith as a kid, all the people, transfer growth, people that come from other churches, moved into town that are looking for a church. You'll get all the other stuff too. But if we only shoot for that lowest common denominator, then that's all we're going to get. That's all we're going to get. And I think what we have to do is just reposition ourselves as, are we on mission with God? What are we really after? One of the challenges that I sometimes venture to give to churches is, here's the big question. Do you want to reach your city, your community for Christ, or do you want to grow your local church? And inevitably, you guys would do it if I opened up, but I'm just going to make it rhetorical. But inevitably, somebody says, well, can't we do both? And the answer is yes, but. If your primary goal is just growing your local church, you can do that by doing some really cool things and attracting lots of transfer growth, people just from other churches. I mean, that happens all the time, And so that's not hard to do. And again, if you're evangelistic reaching out, you'll meet people already Christians looking for a church to join your church. You'll have that experience too, because they'll happen to fall in your net, And so, but the thing is, if your goal is saying I want to grow my local church, you might not reach your community, because you can grow your local church by just getting more Christians to come. Not hard. Again, people do it all the time. You have a big enough budget, you can do all kinds of things, And so like those are done all the time. If your goal is to reach your community, you will probably also grow your local church, because that will be one of the primary vehicles for reaching your community. So again, if we have our priorities straight, if our priorities are focused on growing God's kingdom, our focus is focused on reaching our city, then we are very likely to see our church grow. Okay? But if our focus is just, I just want to add people in my pews, then most churches that are doing that, I mean, frankly, like statistically, right now, church growth through evangelism in the U.S. is only 4 or 5% through evangelism. Church growth in the U.S. is predominantly, it's well over 90% is through transfer growth from other churches. That's not true about the global church. That's an American problem. And so, if we're just trying to grow our local church, I mean, churches do it all the time. They can just attract already Christians, and they kind of, they get a good budget for it. They do some cool things, and people come. It works for that, but you don't reach your city. If I want to reach my city, the church will experience growth, because now, again, maybe everyone doesn't end up in your church that is reached, but my church will likely experience growth because it's the primary vehicle for reaching the city. And so it's a yes, but. The yes, but. Okay, anything else? And then we're gonna wrap here in a second. I just have one more quick thing for you to do. Anything else? Millennials, we're moved on to Gen Z, man. we're already to the next thing. That's a yeah. That is a longer conversation. But a lot of what we're talking about today does hit that younger generation. It is a lot more authentic relationship. They hate bait and switch. It's going to be authentic. It's going to be relational. It's going to be genuine. It's going to be honest. A lot of the things that we have fought about for generations, they just don't care about. But there is interest in spirituality. That's there. But it's a little bit longer conversation, because that's like a whole subtopic. But I've actually done a class at missions conferences called Evangelism in a Post-Everything World, where we get into some of that. But maybe another time. But so.
We had a park ministry,
Mm-hmm.
and the people that came and attended,
Mm-hmm.
you would have some that were clearly at the learning level.
Sure.
And then you had some that were just sort of brilliant.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
And you're looking, and you've got all of these people at the park
Mm-hmm.
bench.
Mm-hmm.
And, there was a lot of back and forth,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of learning,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of understanding. But they left harmoniously.
Yeah, sure.
They all left, feeling great and good about what happened. So we saw that with our church,
Mm-hmm.
as far as the learning level and
Sure. Yeah, we use a strategy. We use a strategy a lot that's inductive, so open-ended questions in like a Bible discussion format. And we've had all kinds of situations. And one of the guys in our team said once, he had just learned it. He was new, and he said, but he was leading a group, and he said, "Man, this seems to work because we start with like 5 parts insanity, and somehow it ends up orthodox by the end of the conversation." And so, guys, I want you to do one more thing. I want you to, and if you're a writer, write this down, put it on your phone. It really does help to write it down, so if maybe you got a phone or something. But what I want you to do is set a goal for yourself. I want you to set 2 kinds of goals. First, set a little bit longer range goal. So the next few months, what are some of the ways you want to grow, some things you're committed to doing? Don't just say, "Oh, I want to be more evangelistic." No, put some action steps to it, okay? Some practical things that you want to do to help yourself grow. Okay, that's how you grow, is by doing something. So come up with some action steps, some things you want to do over the next few months. And then second type of goal I want you to write down is your 3-day goal. There was a study done. It's an Ivy League study where they asked people questions, and they found that if you made a decision to do something and you didn't take a first step in the next 3 days, it was only good intentions, you're not going to do anything. You will walk out of here and do nothing. You'll say, "Oh, that was nice." Hopefully you say that. And then you'll walk out and not do anything. So what is your 3-day goal? Okay, it's not going to be everything that you've learned, everything we've talked about in the first 3 days, but what are some first steps? What are things you want to do in the next 3 days? Now listen, let me tell you, here's what a good goal is. A good goal isn't comparing yourself to anybody else. It's what is growth for you. It's a little bit, it's achievable, it's just enough that it's achievable for you, but it's also pushes the boundary a little bit, it challenges you. It's achievable and challenging to you at the same time. So just a little bit of growth, a little bit, here's action steps that I think I could do, but yeah, this is still going to challenge me a little bit. So it starts to stretch you, okay, but it feels doable. And it needs to be for you. For one person may be like, I'm going to tell 5 stories. I'm just putting numerics on it. I'm going to tell 5 stories and do 20 spiritual statements. And someone else in the room may say, I'm talking to a human. Look, it's just, what is growth for you? Okay? It's not compared to anyone else, but what stretches you, what challenges you. So come up with that. And then, if you're serious about it, turn to the person next to you and share it. And if you're real serious about it, give them permission to ask you about it later. Okay? So go ahead and do that. Come up with your goals. I'd suggest writing them down somewhere, digital or otherwise. And then, turn to the person and share. Again, especially if you're serious about it.